Good afternoon. I'm Robin Lipsky, and I have the honor of being the Executive Director for the Historical Society for the Ninth Judicial Circuit, which is called the NJCHS. I defy anyone to remember the order of those initials. It probably took me 5 years. On behalf of the NJCHS and the Phoenix chapter of the FBA, welcome. A special welcome to the FBA members and also to the NJCHS's members and supporters. Those of you who aren't NJCHS members yet, we hope you will go to our website, njchs.org, to find out about all of the amazing things we do, thus avoiding my 5-minute infomercial about the society, since really we're all here and excited to hear from our panel and not from me. I will introduce the panel. Serving today as our moderator and also as a panelist is Ninth Circuit Judge Mary Schroeder. When Judge Schroeder earned her law degree from the University of Chicago Law School, she was one of only 6 women in the class. In 1973, when she became a partner at the Louis Rocha firm, she was the first woman to achieve partnership in a large firm, not only in Arizona, but also in the entire Rocky Mountain West. She's purported to be the first woman from Arizona to argue and win a case before the United States Supreme Court. She was the first woman to serve on the Arizona Court of Appeals and the youngest woman appellate judge in America at the time. Hopefully, we will find out shortly if any of these experiences in any way prepared her in 2000 to become the first woman to serve as Chief Judge of the Ninth Circuit. Our next panelist is Chief Judge Mary Murguia. While I'm not certain if Chief Judge Murguia or her twin sister was the first to arrive, I do know that Judge Murguia has been a first in so many other circumstances. She was a founding member of the First Women's Advisory Council at Kansas University's School of Law. She was the first Latina to serve on the U.S. District Court of Arizona. She is only the second woman to serve as Chief Judge of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and is the first Latina to be a Chief Judge of any circuit in the history of the United States. Prior to joining the bench, Chief Judge Murguia served as an assistant district attorney in her hometown of Kansas City, Kansas, and as an assistant U.S. attorney and criminal deputy chief for the District of Arizona. She also served in the executive office for U.S. attorneys at the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. from 1998 to 2000, and was the director of that office beginning in 1999. Justice Ruth McGregor is here with us today. She brings to the panel not only her own experience, but also her knowledge of the extraordinary career of Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, for whom Justice McGregor served as an inaugural law clerk at the Supreme Court. Justice O'Connor, who after a lifetime of firsts, including being the first woman to serve as a state Senate majority leader, in 1981 became the first woman to serve on the Supreme Court of the United States. I am hopeful that Justice McGregor will also share some of her own experiences and reflections with us as well from her 9 years serving on the Arizona Court of Appeals, 3 of those years as its chief, and from her time on the Arizona Supreme Court, where she served from 1998 until 2009. Also with us today is Trish Refo. In addition to being a partner at the Snell and Wilmer firm, Ms. Refo is immediate past president of the American Bar Association and was the first Arizona woman to serve as ABA president, and I believe the first woman to serve in that role from any of the states in the Ninth Circuit. Ms. Refo has served as chair of the ABA House of Delegates and the ABA section of litigation. She served on the Arizona Supreme Court's Advisory Committee on Rules of Evidence and is a former member of the Advisory Committee on Federal Rules of Evidence of the United States Judicial Conference. She also has been inducted into the Maricopa County Bar Association Hall of Fame. And with that, I turn the panel over to Judge Schroeder.
Thank you very much, Robin. It's just such a pleasure and an honor to be up here with these wonderful women. We've all known each other for a great many years, as you'll probably be able to tell from the course of our conversation. Just to give you a little idea, historical, generational idea of who we are. Justice McGregor over there is also speaking for Justice O'Connor. Justice O'Connor graduated from law school in the 1950s. I graduated from law school in the 1960s. Justice McGregor graduated from law school in the 1970s. And Judge Murguia and Trish Refo graduated in the 1980s. So you have a kind of a sweep of history, and you can keep that in mind as you listen to us. So I guess the first question that I want to throw out, and I'm going to ask Ruth to.
Was anybody born in the 1980s? I wonder.
Okay, good.
Sorry, Judge.
It's okay. You're the chief. So I'm going to throw out the first question and ask Ruth to talk to it for herself and also for Justice O'Connor. Would you describe your first job in the law and the challenges you faced at the beginning of your career?
Yeah, I'm going to talk first a bit about Justice O'Connor, and you know some of this, but it's good to think back to the fact that she graduated in 1952. And I think most of you know the story. She applied to every law firm that put a paper notice up on the boards at Stanford. She got no interviews, although she was order of the coif. She got one interview finally with a Los Angeles firm through a friend. And that is the famous story where she was asked whether she was a good typist and told perhaps they could hire her as a legal secretary. And when she told them that wasn't exactly the kind of job she was looking for and left there. From that point, really, for the next 20 years, I think the challenges she faced are really instructive. Through all that time, she had to find a way to make opportunities where none were readily available. So first, she waited a year while John O'Connor finished law school, and she had heard that the San Mateo County attorney had hired women. So she went and applied there. And he said, well, you're terrific and all of this, but I don't have any positions open. And she said, well, that's no problem. I'll work for no pay. And he said, well, that's very nice. And we'd love to have you, but I don't have an office. And she said, well, I spoke to your secretary. She seems very nice. And she told me that I could share her space and put a desk in there. So being outflanked by Sandra O'Connor, the county attorney offered her a job. Several months later, he actually was appointed to be a Superior Court judge and a position open, and she worked there for the rest of the year. Then the next delay to her legal career occurred because John O'Connor went into the Army for 2 years, was stationed in Germany. There weren't a lot of opportunities for women lawyers there, but she found out that she could work as a civilian lawyer for the quartermaster's office. So she spent the better part of 2 years helping with government contracts. Then they came back to Phoenix. Again, she could find no job. No law firms would hire her. And so she and another lawyer opened a storefront legal office where they took literally anything that came through the door, including assignments for criminal defense work. Well, they didn't make very much money, but it was a way to keep herself active in practicing law. Then once she had 3 young children, she decided she really should not work full time. And she looked around for something else she could do. And at that time, she wrote questions for the Arizona bar exam, and she actually worked doing memos for the bankruptcy court. Again, keeping her hand in, even though there was no job available. The next thing she decided when the children were a little older, she applied with the Arizona Attorney General, and she asked them for a part-time job. Well, they had heard of no such thing. They didn't have part-time lawyers. So they said that's not possible. So she agreed to work full-time. And then after a year, when she had proved how valuable she was to the office, she renewed her request, and then they found it was possible to have part-time work. Then, of course, she began her political career, in the meantime, having done all sorts of community work. And finally, in 1974, she decided she really wanted to return to law, but as a judge. Now, this wasn't the easiest thing in the world. 1974 was the last time that Arizona elected its Superior Court judges in the large counties. And there were no openings, there were no vacant seats. But undeterred, she ran against a very popular, well-known incumbent, defeated him in the primary, which was all of it, that by that time, she was a Republican in Maricopa County, and she was elected to the Superior Court. I think that might have been the first time she had a position that really tested her legal skills, and it was more than 20 years after she graduated from law school. Then, of course, a few years later, when Mary Schroeder left the Arizona Court of Appeals and a position open, she applied for that, even though our governor was a Democrat, and she, of course, was a well-known Republican, and was appointed to the Arizona Court of Appeals. So long before her nomination to the United States Supreme Court, she really found ways, very creative ways, particularly for the time, to find a way that she could combine her legal career with the rest of her life and not lose all the skills she had worked so hard to gather.
Right. And Sandra did everything well.
Yes, she
I
did
did.
everything well.
Yes. So she was extraordinarily capable in every sense, I think. I'd like to chime in here a little bit because I almost didn't have any job at all in the law when I went to law school. I couldn't get any summer clerkships. I couldn't, I was simply not, the women were just ignored. And a funny thing happened in my second year in law school, which was that Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And President Johnson, and he doesn't get enough credit for this, President Johnson issued an executive order and said that every agency in the United States government was to start hiring women and minorities. And since when we in the class of 65 started law school, it was not possible for a woman or a minority to get a job. There were very few of us who were dumb enough to go to law school at that time. And fortuitously, the world changed while we were in law school. And so I had my pick of any job in the United States government. And I took a job with the Justice Department, which turned out to be a very good thing for me. Of course, 5 years later, when I moved to Arizona, I was back in the same boat. I couldn't get any job. And I had to work at it a little bit, but eventually it worked out. But I found that people accepted women in the jobs they did if they did the job well and if they worked harder than anybody else. So let me ask Judge Murguia, what about your experiences first off the bat?
Right off the bat, I went to work in the local district attorney's office in Kansas City. And it was interesting because, well, one, the pay, I remember that my starting pay in the summer of 1985 was $18,000. That was the pay for an assistant, someone with a law degree. And I noticed that maybe some of my male counterparts didn't start at that same salary. And then the other sort of experience that I had there was that I was eager to do any kind of work and wanted to do any kind of work, but the DA there immediately, assigned me and all the women to all the crimes involving women and children. And, I think he was well-intentioned, but I think he thought that we would be more empathetic and be able to handle that. But it was clear that there was some, gender reason for that. And I really wanted to do the homicides. I wanted to do some of the other cases. And I ended up getting to do some of the other cases, but all the women were in that got those particular class of cases. In the end, that benefited me because those cases tend to go to trial more. They also had very interesting issues. When I was there at in the DA's office, it was just the beginning of DNA typing of blood. And before it was just regular blood typing, and then we had to do a whole new kind of forensic evidence presentation with DNA. And I think it was in but I think it was 1981, 82 that that was the first conviction in Florida for DNA with DNA. So I say that because by putting me in these positions, I ended up getting a lot more and better experience than I thought than some of the other people in the office. And it's sort of like making lemonade out of lemons. I mean, to the extent that you could view it that way. And I made the most of that experience because, I mean, then, you were ready for when Dauber, challenges came. You had, I had done a lot on that front in Kansas. And then later when I came to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Arizona. But it just sometimes people find those challenges, and I think you kind of have to meet those challenges and try to do the best you can to make the most of them.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that the number of jobs women didn't get And I remember a lawyer once told me that that there was one woman in his firm. It was a large firm in Chicago. There was one woman in his firm, and she wanted to do labor work, but she'd never be able to do labor work. She was going to do tax work for the rest of her life because she wouldn't take the kind of language that was used in labor law. So was determined when I went into private practice, I was going to do labor law. So Trish.
That's a great story. So by the time I graduated in 1983, I was reaping the benefits of the Mary Schroeders and the Sandra Day O'Connor and the Ruth McGregors, because it wasn't a question about could you get a job, right, as a female graduate of law school. But I will tell you, to give you some sense of how different it was then, when I interviewed with big law firms, and that's all I was looking at, major law firms in a number of different cities. One of the things in those days that I asked was, typically I would pitch this at the sort of the senior associate woman that they gave me to speak to, because usually it was only one, maybe two. But I would say to them, so how many women partners are there at the firm? And every single firm except one, the answer was immediate: 5, 3, 2, whatever it was. Each of them knew it and answered the question very specifically. And the law firm I ended up at was the one where I asked the question, and the senior woman associate looked back and went, I'm not sure. I know, I've never counted. And I thought, that, honest to goodness, that is perhaps too much the reason why I chose what I chose, because I just thought that was a very cool answer. And in terms of, challenges and things that you had to learn, I do remember that in those days, certainly in Chicago, the courtrooms were still physically built for men as advocates. And I'm 5'2". Okay. So, I mean, do you remember a long time ago, the picture of the Queen in Congress and all you could see was her hat because the podium was too high? That was my problem. And the senior woman I worked with at my firm looked at me at one point and she said, "You're too short. You have to wear high heels." And I put on high heels because she said so, and I'm still in them this many years later.
The point about nothing being built for women is very true. That I took the bar exam at the law school when I moved to Arizona at the law school at the U of A, and there was no women's room at the law school, and so we had to use the office for the dean's, the restroom for the dean's secretaries when we took the bar, and also, that was true of in courthouses. In law schools, the women's room was like this, and the men's room was like a cathedral. So we hear a lot these days about mentors. I guess I'd like to ask each of you, why are mentors important? Did you have mentors who inspired you, and can you tell us a little bit about them? Let's start with, how about starting the other way with Trish?
So I still have mentors, and 3 of them are sitting up here. I'm having serious imposter syndrome up here. You do understand that. But so you never stop needing a mentor, no matter how senior you get, because at least I hope I'm always still learning. And that's really what mentoring is about, is somebody who will have your best interests at heart, will tell you the what's what when you need to hear it, but will also guide you and encourage you and help you along the way. I had male mentors. I had female mentors of all different sorts and varieties, right? One of the things as a litigator that I tried to do as a young lawyer was make sure I worked with every sort of stripe of litigator, if you will, that I could find. I worked with some of the truly table pounders, right? Like the really big guys especially back in 1983, who would seriously, loom over witnesses and depositions and bang on the table and do all of that, not because that was ever going to be effective for me, but because I could learn from watching somebody do things that differently. Right. And they helped me and mentored me and helped to grow me up as a lawyer. And you've got to be strategic about finding your mentors. Lots of places assign mentors to us when we were young lawyers. And I had that as well. And that was great. But you also got to find your own and develop those relationships. And then when the time comes, be willing to give back by mentoring other lawyers to pay back the people, or pay forward, if you want to put it that way.
Right.
The people
I
who
would
mentored you.
imagine that you couldn't become president of the American Bar Association without mentors in the Bar Association. Is that right?
For Pete's sake. I mean, the list is way too long, yes, to even begin to list. And they taught me the ugly politics sometimes of bar associations. They taught me the joys of bar association work, the benefits to you personally, and the benefits that you can give to the profession by doing all of that work. So yeah, especially in our community service and professional service lives, the mentoring is deeply important.
And I would assume that you would encourage young lawyers to join associations of other lawyers and would benefit from that, right?
Absolutely. If you're not a member of something in the organized bar, you're missing the boat. And I don't mean being a member of the Arizona State Bar or whatever other state bar, if you're listening from elsewhere in the Ninth Circuit, but because that's a requirement. But I mean giving back to our profession through the work of the organized bar. That is how we have power as lawyers. That is how we make a difference in our nation and in our justice system, is by working together in the organized bar to make change and make improvements. Thank you for that opportunity to give that plug.
Judge Murguia. Mentors.
Yes. Well, mentors are critical, I think, to any sort of advancement. And I was fortunate, just like you all here on this dais, to have a really wonderful, caring mentors. And, the ones that immediately come to mind, because there are many, is not a woman. It's Judge McNamee. He hired me. I was his last hire before, he was the U.S. attorney in Arizona, and then he later became the chief judge when I came onto the bench. And he was so very welcoming, always gave me good sound advice along the way once I met him, after he hired me. And I know that that's true not just for me, but for other women and other people. He's just been, and I think that's because he generally cares about Arizona, the legal, all the lawyers here coming together and having a really collegial and respected bar. And he cares about that, and you can tell that by how he supports others. And his advice and support was absolutely critical to me. And I say that because we're here in Arizona, and I think he doesn't get enough credit for all that he does behind the scenes. The other mentor that comes to mind is Janet Napolitano, who was the U.S. attorney, who eventually became the nominated and confirmed U.S. attorney after Judge McNamee had become judge. And what's interesting, she was just very supportive, gave me good advice, also promoted me within the U.S. Attorney's Office and gave me additional responsibilities. And what's probably the most remarkable is that she was mentored by Judge Schroeder. And so you see that the mentoring chain is so important, that if you are able, to continue it, which I feel very grateful to, and I try to do the best that I can to try to, support others, especially if if they need assistance in any way. And then the third mentor that comes to mind is Janet Reno, who was the former Attorney General of the United States, and I had the privilege and opportunity to work with her when I was working at Maine Justice in the late 90s. And we would have meetings, and there'd be a lot of important people around the table, but she'd take the time to ask me afterwards how I was doing, and then she'd give me advice on how to get different issues resolved and how to work with certain individuals. And I'll never forget the kindness, and always appreciate the kindness and the guidance that I was given. Obviously, Judge Mary Schroeder has been just a remarkable mentor and role model for me as well. But I really encourage you, if you can, to mentor others. I think it's really important, and it's something that I think contributes greatly to our bar.
Yeah, for Justice O'Connor, when she graduated from law school, and even when she graduated from law school, she didn't have many women she could look to as mentors in the legal profession. I mean, as in 1952, only one woman Florence Helen, had ever been appointed to a Circuit Court of Appeals. There had never been a female attorney general in this country, never a female solicitor general. There had never been a woman serve as the Chief Justice of a state Supreme Court. So the mentors and the 3% of lawyers were women, something like that. In 1977, when President Carter got to appoint a group of women, including Judge Schroeder, and really expanded the number of women on the federal bench, before that, only 10 women had ever served as an Article III judge. So women mentors were kind of few and far between. Justice O'Connor, I know, was very grateful to some of her professors, both in undergraduate school and in law school, who really interested her in the study of law, which was an unusual path for a woman to follow. And she also, in Arizona, in her work with the community and political parties, became very close and was mentored by the political leaders in Arizona. So when it came time for her nomination to the U.S. Supreme Court, she had very powerful support from the political powers in Arizona. And she eventually became a mentor to me. But at the time I started practicing, we still were pretty short of women to serve as mentors. I started practicing in 1974. And that was the first year that large Phoenix law firms hired women directly out of law school. Judge Schroeder was there working, but they hadn't hired anyone. It only took 10 years after the Civil Rights Act was passed. And they finally said, maybe we should. I learned years later that one of the partners at my law firm at Fenimore Craig, now Fenimore, said he would resign if the firm hired a lawyer, but he didn't. And we became good friends. I didn't learn this in time to ask him why. So really, when I started practicing, thinking about mentors, after the election in 1974, there were 3 women judges on the Maricopa County Superior Court. There were none on the Arizona Court of Appeals. Lorna Lockwood was on the Supreme Court, but near the end of her career. And I don't recall having very much interaction with the judges. They had their own lives and problems to face, I'm sure, and weren't really accustomed to be in that role of having a lot of young women lawyers come. So we really became mentors to one another. And that was when the Arizona Women Lawyers Association was founded. And it gave us a place to look for encouragement and support, which is what a mentor does. And so we had our own safe place where people would understand that our reaction to a totally inappropriate comment did not mean we lacked a sense of humor. And it did not mean we weren't tough enough to practice law. It meant we were not receptive to really inappropriate comments or touches or whatever was the flavor of the day. So we had this very supportive group of women, and a small group that luckily grew over the years. Within my law firm, I had some really good mentors who were very accepting of women lawyers and taught me a lot and supported me. Justice O'Connor, once she was in a position to mentor others, really took that responsibility seriously. She reached down to help others. She hired a lot of women as law clerks. She was very supportive of them and other people that she met. I know she convinced Trish Refo that she had to take part in some activities that we were doing in Arizona. So she made sure that people were part of the system, and she would do anything in her power, which was a lot, to get you involved in something and to find a place for you there. So she really inspired a generation. It was interesting the last week, I just have to say, watching the hearings for Judge Jackson and hearing her talk about the letters she had gotten from around the country. They're very much the same as the kinds of letters that came to Justice O'Connor from young women, young girls, law students who suddenly see the real possibilities that weren't there before. And I think that's what mentors are supposed to do. They support, they encourage, they make you see possibilities for yourself you might not otherwise see. So they're essential for all of us.
And we've talked about this in other settings, but in our vintage, most women lawyers can tell you where they were when they heard that Sandra Day O'Connor had been nominated formally to the United States Supreme Court. I remember precisely where I was standing. It was that world-changing a moment to us. I hope the same way that the nomination of Judge Brown Jackson will be for a generation of women lawyers of color.
August 19th, 1981. That's the morning that President Reagan had a press conference and nominated Sandra Day O'Connor. And I was standing in front of a mirror in the bathroom getting ready for work. And it's somewhat emotional because it's like, is it possible? I'm working really hard here, making $18,000 a year. And is it possible for a woman to really be on the Supreme Court after so many years? It was a moment. I also remember, for me, the first time a woman was nominated for vice president, that was Geraldine Ferraro, and that was July 12th of 1984. There was a lot happening in the 80s, and I'm really glad to be of that vintage, as Patricia says. Those were moments because it was breakthrough. We didn't crash the ceiling, as they say, or shatter the ceiling, but you were able to get up off the floor a little bit. You felt some air underneath you. And it was dramatic because it gave you hope that, not just that those positions are attainable, but that things were going to level out a little bit.
Yeah. Can I just say something? When you leave here, if you haven't paid attention to the statue of Justice O'Connor that's here, this is relevant to the shattering the glass ceiling. If you look at the statue, you will see that she's standing on, it looks like maybe flagstone pieces. Those are intended to represent the pieces of the shattered glass ceiling beneath her feet. And on each of those, on the edge, you'll read of some position she held, Arizona Court of Appeals judge, Senate Majority Leader, and all of the different positions she held that served as stepping stones, also represented as shattered glass pieces of the glass ceiling. It's a beautiful statue, one that was done by an Arizona woman sculptor, Susan Henningsen, and it's worth, if you have time, I know they're going to kick us out of here pretty quick at 5:30, but if you have time today or some other time, really look at, and all around the hem of her skirt, you'll see the names of family members and other associates. So but the shattered glass ceiling is very clearly predicted there.
Yeah, on that theme, I remember the day that Sandra was appointed because it was during our the Ninth Circuit Judicial Conference, which was taking place in, I think, the Tetons. And the press expected that one of our judges, Cliff Wallace, was going to be nominated to the Supreme Court. We knew there was going to be a nomination. And the place was flooded with these reporters and photographers following Cliff Wallace around. And all of a sudden, the news came that Sandra Day O'Connor had been appointed, and there was just absolute first surprise, and then kind of rumination, and then the reporters took off. that we never saw them again. Mentors, everybody has said, are so important. There were no, in 1965, which is when I was in the Justice Department, there were still no women in any position of authority. There had never been a woman attorney general. There had never been a woman assistant attorney general, I don't believe, or deputy attorney general. And all of my supervisors in the Justice Department were men, but they respected quality and they instilled an ethic of doing quality work, which I think is the tradition of the Justice Department that exists to this day, and one of the reasons why people are loyal to it. But here in Arizona, we built a tradition of mentorship. Sandra is famous as a mentor. Her former law clerks are everywhere. And she instilled in them a belief in public service that she had. And not all justices of the Supreme Court do that, but Sandra did. And here in Arizona, I found mentors who were principally men, other than Lorna Lockwood, who was the first woman ever to be this Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, and that was back in the 60s. And Lorna sort of stood there as the symbol of why, when I came to Arizona and there weren't any women in the practice, people couldn't say you can't do it because Lorna had done it. So I think in terms of a spiritual and actual mentor, Lorna stands out in my mind. And when she retired from the Arizona Supreme Court, she called me and asked me to apply for her position because she was the only woman in the appellate judiciary in Arizona at the time. And I said, I can't because I haven't been a member of the Arizona bar for 10 years. And that's a requirement. So she called me back in 2 weeks and said, there's going to be a vacancy on the Court of Appeals and you qualify for that by 2 weeks. So that's how I applied for the Arizona Court of Appeals. And I am very grateful to Lorna Lockwood. And of course, when I was in practice, I had male partners who were extraordinarily supportive. And the parent of all mentoring here in Arizona, I guess, is John P. Frank, who was the partner at Lewis and Rocha, who was a born mentor because he had taught for years at Yale Law School. And so he had mentored all of these students through the years. And when he became a partner in a law firm, he just sort of took on that same role of being a mentor and taught all of his partners and associates to do the same thing. So a kind of a related question to this is the question of role models. I didn't really have any female role models when I was in law school because there weren't any females in the law, with a very few exceptions. But let me ask each of you if you had role models, and who were your role models when you were starting out in the profession? Ruth, do you want to start with that?
Well, starting in the profession, again, if you're talking about women as role models, there really weren't. We had to kind of make our own way and our own method of practicing, and we had to figure out that we didn't have to act just like the men. Sometimes we felt like it. I mean, we did, but we didn't have to. That didn't have to be our role model. The style of practice that fit us was one that we had to develop and understand for ourselves. And we did that, I think, with a lot of help from one another. As the years went by, certainly we saw nationally within law, on the courts, people that we could really look up to as role models. And I know Judge Schroeder was one of the early members of the women of the judges, the Judges Association, the National Association
of Women Judges.
Right. And I was fairly early to that, but not. And that was the sort of thing that Trish was talking about an organized group that brings people together with a common base of understanding where you can really grow. And I developed or learned a lot about people who then served as my role models from that kind of association. I'm sure it's true in the ABA too, if you're involved closely with that. But when your community is relatively small, as the Arizona legal community was when we started practicing law, not so much anymore, you really have very few people to look to. And I know I never heard Justice O'Connor talk about people who were her role models. And again, as far as women, who would have there been? She had to develop all of that herself. And I think that's a big change today. You look and you see no matter what field women are in, there are great role models, whether it's politics or law enforcement or the military or being in the judiciary or being a chef, a top chef, no matter what it is,
Science.
Women have entered the ranks, not to the extent perhaps they should have, but to such a level that people can find someone and say, this is who I want to be like. And that's a really good thing to have and to strive for.
Yeah. Judge Murguia?
I'll just briefly add, I think I mentioned earlier some of my mentors, but in terms of role models, there was, obviously Sandra Day O'Connor, and I felt so fortunate because I moved here from the Midwest and I came to a state where, the number one role model lawyer became, the first Supreme Court justice. And so it was, I felt really fortunate, but I feel like I didn't see enough women of color in those positions for me. And so for me, the role models that I look to and who I now call my friends are Barbara Mandel and Anna Baca, who were judges on the Superior Court and took leadership roles as judges on the Superior Court. And it was very inspirational for me to know that they could achieve those levels. And certainly there were not many women, let alone women of color, back in Kansas where I came from. And so that was really inspiring for me to see these role models locally here.
So role models obviously have been deeply important to all of us, but I guess the point I'd like to make is sometimes role models can be also people who tell you, you may think I did it right, don't do what I did. Right? The senior woman in the law firm that I started out at was the first woman admitted to the American College of Trial Lawyers. And she received a plaque that had acknowledging her membership that used all male pronouns because that's all they'd ever done. And she brought it to their attention and they sent her a second plaque and she had both of them hung in her office, right? One underneath the other. And she went back to work 10 days after the birth of both of her sons, because that's what she did. And that's what was expected in those days. Mm-hmm. And she was a role model because when she gathered the younger women, and she's like 26-ish years my senior, she would say, do not do what I did. Let me tell you what I did. And let me tell you how bad it was and how dumb it was that the law firm at the time expected that. So don't do that. I learned from listening to my role model say, don't be like me, because sometimes that can be a deeply powerful message. The other point I guess I would just add is, we've talked about how your role models can be, don't need to be your same gender. I mean, John Bauma, like John Frank, was probably the biggest role model in my professional life. So some role models are kind of up here, right? They are so amazing and much senior to you, and you look at them in that way. Other role models can be more your peers. I mean, Georgia Staten is here. Georgia is one of my role models. She's got to be the best woman trial lawyer in the state of Arizona, at least in my opinion. And she is, in that way, a role model for me. I learn from her because even though, or maybe because we are peers. So your role models don't always have to be of a generation or two ahead of you, because they're standing around us all the time.
Right. You know, I wrote a little article for the ASU Law Journal, and I think the last paragraph was a thank you to. It was about trying to find a job in Arizona when I moved here, and the last paragraph is a thank you to my partners at Lewis and Roca, because and the last sentence is there were no role models, and we had to figure out what to do when I was pregnant. There was just no precedent whatsoever. And one of the partners came in, a very managing partner came in and was very worried and said, what are we going to do? And I said, well, this is the Vietnam War. And I said, I think that I'll take as much time off as the men who are doing ROTC training. And that he thought that was a very good idea. And that all worked out. But you have to kind of figure it out when there's nobody there who's ever done it before. And I had a lot of help from people. I think as far as one person I want to mention as a role model, simply because as women, when we were growing up, we were not expected to do things terribly well. And I remember the one woman on the faculty at the University of Chicago told me to go into litigation and told me to try appellate litigation. And she said, if you finish an argument and you don't cry, the judges, who were all assumed to be male because they were, the judges will think you're wonderful. That was kind of the expectation. If you get through an argument and don't cry. And so we always worry, or those, I think women still kind of worry about falling on their face. And so one of my role models as I was trying to prepare for being the chief judge of the Ninth Circuit was Laddie Kaur, who was the president of ASU. And I never heard, maybe I missed it, but I never heard Laddie Kaur say anything that was wrong. I never heard him really screw up. And that was what I wanted to make sure that I didn't do. I wanted to make sure that I didn't fall on my face when I was the chief judge of the Ninth Circuit. I'm sure that you won't, Mary.
Thank you.
That's kind of. I'm really glad that things have changed and it's not that way anymore. I do hope. But that kind of leads into.
Mary, can I just
yeah,
pause
sure.
and say, I mean, this is so important to hear that story you just told, because, and I just want to highlight, you know, you all maybe for the first time learning about Arizona history from a participant of Arizona history. And that's really significant. And because I see a little too often these days taking for granted, like maternity leave. That didn't always come. And I just think it's a good reminder that, you know, you don't, you know, you're not aware and very appreciative of what others have done. There's a danger there that you're going to lose sight of what these very brave, courageous, strong, determined women did on our behalf who came before us.
Well, and once again, they laid paths for all of us. My son is adopted and came to us unexpectedly, literally over a weekend. Okay. And there had never been a partner at my firm that had taken maternity leave for an adoption. I mean, it just hadn't, nobody had been told they couldn't. It just simply hadn't come up. Right. And it was everybody else who had done the hard work of fighting for maternity leave for natural born children that allowed me to call John Bauma Monday morning at about 8:30, having picked our son up on Saturday. And I said, John, I had a baby this weekend and I'm on maternity leave. I just announced that I was on maternity leave. I didn't ask because I didn't have to. I just knew it was going to be okay because folks ahead of me had fought that fight. And after he got up off the floor, he said, well, of course, you're on maternity leave.
And now we have paternity leave and everything. So it's all good. But we've had to fight for families. Always, always, always. Okay, well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about mistakes. Because nobody's path to success is unbroken. And let's talk a little bit about if you made mistakes, almost made mistakes. How did you deal with problems like that?
Ooh, ooh.
There we go.
Okay, I am the pipsqueakiest of pipsqueak lawyers. I am in at this point, let's say my maybe second full month, possibly third full month as a lawyer. I had been assigned to a TRO and then a preliminary injunction, and we lost both. And I was so low on the team, rankings that I had two jobs for the Seventh Circuit brief appealing from our losses. One was to do the site checking and shepherdizing. And in those days, you did it by books. Do you remember that? And my second job was to figure out the date on which the brief was due. Well, I'd been to law school. I know how to do this. I look in the Federal Rules of Appellate Procedure. I see the deadlines. I figure it out. And I, with great confidence, because we didn't have docketing departments that did all this in those days, I said, this is the date on which the brief is due. So the runner, because in those days, everything had to be personally, physically filed. The runner goes to the court with our brief and calls back to the partner and says, they say the brief is 3 days late. And my entire career flashed before my eyes. And indeed it was, because the Seventh Circuit had, who knew, its own rules that altered the timing enough, right? And so, and in those days, they didn't publish them together in a book so that you could look at them in the way we can now. And I thought it was the end before I had even started. Mercifully, our opposing counsel also thought that our brief was due on the same day, number one. So he was as dumb as I was. And he was the partner in the other side. And he was a good man and an honorable lawyer. And he didn't join in, but did not in any way object to our request after the fact to file 3 days late. I did not get fired. I got talked at in fairly strong language, as I deserved, but I survived.
That's an interesting story. How about you guys?
I aged years. But
Yeah. Mine also, I'm sure I made many, many mistakes, but the one that immediately comes to mind, as this one did for Trish, I was a fairly new lawyer and I was trying my first case on my own. And it was a rear end auto collision. I mean, I was representing the driver of the car who ran into the other one. It wasn't a big case, obviously. That's why I was trying it. But for some reason, the lawyer on the plaintiff's side was one of the best trial lawyers at the time in Arizona. And he just wiped the floor with me. I mean, I didn't know how to stop him from doing any of the things that he was doing. As an example, a class of students walked in and they were going to just listen a little bit. And the lawyer turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, we have these students who have joined us. Perhaps I could just tell them a little bit about what the case is." Now the jury is sitting there. And the judge, who should have known better, said, "Of course, Mr. So-and-so, I won't say his name, go ahead and do that." Well, of course, the jury got to hear the closing argument in the middle of the case about everything that had happened and how awful my client was. And I had no idea what to do. I left that courtroom feeling so awful because I knew I wasn't prepared enough to. Now, it turned out, yeah, they got a verdict. It was very small. It didn't have any horrible things, but I don't remember ever feeling as bad as I did at the end of that day when I had to go back and they'd say, how did it go today? I go, well. So that's the thing that immediately comes to my mind. Yeah, I recovered.
I'm not going to touch that to you. Are you going to touch that?
I made a lot of mistakes, and I had a similar, well, not quite experience like that, but I made a statement during closing that I shouldn't have made. And the question was, was it prejudicial? And was I going to be able to survive on appeal? And so I had to argue it. And I'll tell you, when you have to argue your appeal, when you have to defend your mistakes, you don't make those mistakes anymore. And I think that's probably true in life. And true in the course of my career. I mean, you make mistakes, but you can't let it just bog you down. You have to really, figure out what happened here. How do I learn from it? How do I do better next time? And probably instead of mistake, I think probably I would comment on setbacks, because what I see these days, these young people, and it's like, if something doesn't happen, it's like, oh my God, it's, because they did all the IB courses, they did really well and the whole thing, and there's put so much pressure and stress on themselves. And if this one thing didn't happen, what's going to happen? And, for me, I tried to get on at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Kansas City, Kansas, and in Missouri after my 5 years in the DA's office in Kansas City. And I didn't get through. And so it was like rejection. And that was tough. But, I want to tell the story because people think, oh, wow, these women who achieve these places, a lot happened for them. And especially for me, I feel really grateful because the path was paved somewhat for me, but there's still obstacles along the way. And it's how you respond to those obstacles. And the way I look at it, is if that hadn't happened, if I hadn't been rejected, I wouldn't have moved to Arizona. I wouldn't have gotten the job in the U.S. Attorney's Office here, which, opened up a whole nother avenue and career for me. And so I just, especially the younger folks out there, don't be discouraged if everything doesn't come out the way, you think it should, because that could be a really important pivot point for you. And it's really in the end, with the overarching theme from everything I think you've heard here is resilience and the ability, the spirit of just going forward and being able to move forward and putting the best possible foot forward that you can. I think that's the lesson that, we can learn from all of these wonderful people, including Justice O'Connor.
Let me just, you bring to mind the fact that we all came from someplace else. None of us are natives of Arizona. Isn't that right? In fact, none of us went to, you went to law school in Arizona after you moved here, but you didn't go to undergraduate school. So I was just wondering, is there anything special about Arizona that you'd like to impart, or that may have helped or hindered your success along the way? And you want to start, Ruth?
Sure. Let me first say, for Justice O'Connor, if you have read or heard her speak, you know how much Arizona means to her. And she remained in Arizona, and she was really a visitor for a quarter of a century in Washington. And it was a place of opportunity for her and for her family. And she just believes in Arizona and the opportunity it gave her. And I think, in many ways, life is timing. When I started practicing in 1974, this was the time of tremendous growth in Phoenix and the state as a whole, and in the legal profession. So we all had opportunities that weren't available from before. It also was a time that Arizona adopted merit selection.
Yes.
So those of us who would never have run for election as a judge had an opportunity to be appointed and have a judicial career. Why Arizona has had a lot of women leaders. I've always thought part of it has to do with our community property background, because women were always fuller participants. It wasn't until I think the 1970s that all the old married women's property laws went away in some states. And it was a new state. Everybody was from someplace else. The opportunities were here. You didn't need to have a long family background to be a well-respected lawyer or to be a judge or to be anything in particular. We all had a chance to do whatever we wanted. So I think being in Arizona has much to do with the opportunity we were given. Even like with Trish, even to be a trial lawyer. Women in lots of parts of the states were not trying cases when women in Arizona were. So I think it had a lot to do with it.
Opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Trish?
Well, I would add that I've always loved that Arizona, especially the Arizona legal community, still acts like it's kind of like a small town.
Yeah.
I mean, that struck me when I moved here from Chicago. I'm like, everybody knows everybody, and they kind of did, but there was a little bit of not really as well. That is to say, everybody thinks they ought to know everybody because Arizona likes being a small and newer state. And so people aren't afraid to make connections with somebody new. When Justice O'Connor, pointed her finger at me and said, I want you, this was in an ABA thing in Washington, and she said, I want you to go back to Arizona and I want you to call Ruth McGregor. Well, that was the Chief Justice. Thank you very much. And I want you to tell her that you will do anything to help on this issue with merit selection. And I did what I was told. I believe that I had met Justice McGregor before, but certainly not, I wasn't going to just otherwise pick up the phone and call her. But there was something about Arizona that made it seem perfectly reasonable that a justice of the Supreme Court had told me to call the Chief Justice of my state, and I did. And similarly, one of the coolest opportunities that I've ever had was an ABA assignment years ago, kind of similar. My job was to do the oral history of Mary Schroeder. And I mean, I remember thinking, how on earth do I deserve this? And over a course of, I don't know, 9 or 10 sessions, I would show up at her home for a designated chunk of time. And I would literally say things like, tell me the next story, Judge Schroeder. And I got this amazing history of the state of Arizona from her, literally sitting with a tape recorder and retrieving all of her wonderful stories and memories. And that was a huge build for our relationship. So Arizona is a very special place, I think, still, for that reason.
No, I agree. I mean, it's really the people, and not just within the bar, but especially the federal bar. That's really the area that I practice. And you talk about small town, it seems like everybody knows each other who practices in the federal bar here. And just really overwhelmed by the kindness. I mean, there's obstacles, again, along the way, but overall, it's just been a wonderful place. And I think the fact that Justice O'Connor, came from here had a lot to do with it.
Of course, we have our problems and issues, and we're all going to keep on working together to try to solve them. So we want to thank all of you for being here and for our audience on Zoom. And we're out of time, but Robin, I think, is going to tell you where you can go next.
Well, I'm going to ask you first to join me in thanking our amazing panel for all of this. I'm sure that, like me, you found their words both entertaining and inspirational, and very much gave you a lot to think about. We do have some other women's history programs similar on our website. So if you are looking for more inspiration, please check them out. I'm afraid we're out of time. We do have some water and cookies outside, but I have also been asked to let you know that this courthouse does close at 5:30. So we need everyone to not spend as much time socializing as I know you would like to see each other and to see our panelists. But for the next 25 minutes, please join me. And then after that, we all have to skedaddle. So thanks so much for being here. And thank you to the ABA for being the FBA for being our partners today. And thank you again to our amazing panel.